A lot of people in our chapter are very familiar with Greg and Linda, as they've been so gracious to have many classes for us. Our title tonight will be OE in Monarchs, What You Can Do to Reduce It. Our speakers are Linda and Greg. Linda was born in Bloomington, Illinois, moved to Tempe, Arizona. She attended ASU and then University of Illinois and ended up with a master's in chemistry. She's a master gardener as well as a NIPSOT member. Greg was born in Denver, Colorado, attended the University of North Colorado, and then the University of Illinois, and ended with a PhD in chemistry. He's also a member. They've been married for 43 years. They've raised 3 children. One of their highlighted years was living in Amsterdam for 3 years, and they love to travel. They became very interested in monarchs after visiting the monarch wintering grounds in Mexico. They're talented educators. They have developed an almost no-fail process of propagating aquatic or perennial milkweed. They share generously, as I said, seeds and seedlings often. I have a pot not 20 feet from here that is just stuffed with happy perennials that has about 12 pods waiting to ripen up, and then I will have some to share as well. So they're going to speak on how OE is, what it is, how it spreads, its impact on monarchs, and how the spread can be reduced. Using native milkweed helps reduce the spread of OE, and information will be presented on the propagation of native milkweed. In addition, Greg has gone ahead and become very active at the state level. One of his endeavors is participating in the BPMT, which stands for Bring Back the Monarchs to Texas. And his efforts are to educate the public and oversee grants for monarch way stations and pollinator gardens. He's also a strong member of the NICE program. NICE stands for Natives Improve and Conserve the Environment. And that's a program where chapters all over the state can team with local nurseries to promote native plants. Nurseries are listed on the state website as NICE partners. Chapters are allowed to set up tables in the nurseries to promote natives. So it's a win-win for NIPSOT, and it's a win-win for educating nurseries customers. And locally, this is being coordinated as part of our outreach. And we're happy to say that HEB, one of our grocery stores, with several sites in the area, has committed to join this effort in a stepwise fashion. Also, Greg is involved on the communication team with the goal to coordinate and consolidate NIPSOT communication on a statewide basis. So it's my pleasure to introduce Greg and Linda. Over to you.
Thank you for that very nice introduction. This talk is going to be in 2 parts, the OE part and then the milkweed part. I'll turn it over to Linda to talk about OE.
Okay, OE and monarchs. First thing I want to say is I live in Houston. I live on the southeast side of Houston. So my talk really is Houston-centric. So when I give you timetables, remember to take that into account. I'm talking about somebody that lives in Houston. And when I see these butterflies, are when they come through Houston. Okay, so what is OE? Ophryocystis elektroscirrha, big word. It's an obligate parasite that has to live within a host in order to grow and multiply. And the most common host of OE in Houston is the monarch butterfly. Before I get much further on, I think I need to say that when I first started giving these talks, I literally picked up the PowerPoint directly out of monarchparasites.org and used it. So if you go back to monarchparasites.org after this talk and look stuff up, you may see slides that are really similar to what you're seeing tonight. And that's because I took them, I used them, and they said that's okay. As long as they're trying to educate people, that's their emphasis too. So since OE has to live in monarchs, you have to understand the life cycle of a monarch. So I'm starting with this very basic map that I'm assuming everybody has seen before. And on this map, there's 3 kind of separate populations of monarchs. There's the Western migratory monarchs that are west of the Rocky Mountains. There's the Florida monarchs that used to just be down near Miami that didn't migrate, and they are kind of expanding northwards a little bit. And then there's the Eastern migratory monarchs. And I'm interested in the Eastern migratory monarchs because they come through Houston, and that's where I live. So these monarchs winter in Mexico, the Michoacan Mountains of Mexico. In the spring, as the days get longer and warmer, they start moving northward. As they move northward, they start breeding and they start laying their eggs. And we in Houston typically see these monarchs mid-March is about as early as we see them. And you'll see tattered, sad-looking monarchs that have come up from Mexico. These monarchs lay their eggs and then they die, and their progeny will continue on north. And typically in Houston, we see the monarchs leaving our area by the end of May. This is important. So we get the tattered monarchs mid-March. By the end of May, the newly eclosed monarchs should be traveling north. Now, this first generation of monarchs travels north, lays its eggs, dies, and then the second generation of monarchs continues. And this happens for 3 or 4 times. In the fall, when the days get shorter and start cooling down, monarchs are insects. They don't do well when it freezes. So these monarchs do something really interesting. These monarchs that have made it up into southern Canada or northern U.S. go into what we call reproductive diapause. They do not breed. They turn around and they fly all the way back to Mexico, 1 generation, all the way back to Mexico and the Michoacan Mountains, where they start this cycle all over again. And typically in Houston, we see these monarchs that are returning to Mexico in October. Now, the reason I went into so much detail about this is because I want people to understand that those of us that live in Houston should see breeding monarchs and caterpillars in our yard from mid-March through May. We should see monarchs migrating in the fall south in October. They are not breeding. They do not need milkweed. They need nectar sources badly, because when they get to Mexico, there's a lot of butterflies, hundreds of thousands of butterflies, and there's just not enough nectar sources for all of them. So these monarchs that are in diapause and are traveling south need nectar. So if you need something in your yard, nectar sources are what you need in the fall, not milkweed. From June through September, we really shouldn't see many monarchs in our yards at all. So how does OE fit into this? Well, remember I said at the beginning that OE has to live within a host. But I'm going to tell you right now, in the adult monarch, in the butterfly, OE is on the outside, on the abdomen. Since it's on the outside, it has to be covered in what we call a spore. The parasite is protected from the environment by a spore. It's covered up. It's inside. It's dormant. It's not doing any harm at this point, but anywhere those monarchs land, male or female, if they're infected, they can leave some of the OE parasite spores behind. And if it's a female and they lay an egg, they will pass the spores on to the egg. And so that picture on the bottom right of your screen is a monarch egg, and it's got OE spores on it. Now, the first meal that a caterpillar eats when it comes out of its eggshell is the shell. And it's going to eat any OE spores that are on that shell. The caterpillar is going to continue eating the milkweed, and it's going to eat any spores that its parent left or any other butterfly that stopped by left. And this is when the problem starts, because the caterpillar eats the OE spores, and then the dormant spores move through the caterpillar to the midgut, where the caterpillar's digestive chemicals break open that spore and they release a parasite. Now you've got a parasite inside the caterpillar, and it's going to start to duplicate. And these parasites duplicate using asexual reproduction. One parasite splits to 2, 2 split to 4, 4 split to 8. So you can very quickly get many, many parasites just starting with a few. When the caterpillar pupates, the parasites continue to duplicate. And as a matter of fact, this is where most of the damage to the butterfly is caused. It's in the pupal stage as the parasite is duplicating and using resources from the butterfly that's supposed to be forming. About 3 days before this butterfly is due to close, OE spores begin to form around the parasites. So when the adult emerges, it's going to emerge with spores. Now, these infected adults are going to be covered with the spores that can be transferred to anything they touch, but the spores are dormant again. Once the butterflies are infected, they're not going to recover. You can't fix them. By the time the butterfly closes, all the damage has been done, and you can't fix it. If the OE loading is high enough, if there's enough damage done while the caterpillar is growing in the pupal stage, the butterfly may be too weak to even eclose from its chrysalis, or it may eclose from the chrysalis but be too weak to hold on and fall to the ground. Sometimes you'll see butterflies with wings deformed and they'll just be too weak to live and they'll die. What I think is a more insidious problem is when there's a less severe infection of the butterfly. These butterflies emerge and look normal to us, but they're not normal. They weigh less, they have smaller wings, and their wings might be brittle. And these less severely infected monarchs may not be able to migrate. And places with a mild climate, like Houston, may develop an infected year-round population of monarchs. So if you see monarchs in your yard in Houston in July, it's most likely an infected monarch. Now, the only way to know for sure if your monarch is infected is to test for it. And there's a really simple way to test. It involves catching the butterfly, which is the hard part, and then holding it like the picture shows on the right-hand side there, kind of with its abdomen up. Then you take a clear piece of tape and you stick it on the abdomen down near the anus, because that's where a lot of the OE likes to cluster. And you take that smudge on a piece of tape and you put it on a note card. And on the left-hand side, you can see my note card. I've got 8 different samples from 8 different butterflies that we took. Then we check each one of those samples with this microscope. Now, you have to have a microscope that's at least 40 power in order to see the OE spores. We have one that's 60 to 120 power. It's got a nice light on it for old eyes so that you can see. We really like this. And when we bought it, it was $12. It's probably up to $15 on Amazon. So it's really fairly simple. I think this is a really elegant simple way to test for OE and monarchs. Now, if we've tested for the monarch and we looked at the sample through the microscope and we do not see OE spores, we mark the monarch with a permanent marker, just put a dot on it and we release it. That way, if the monarch hangs around in my yard for a year and we catch it again, we'll know we've already tested it and we won't test it twice. Or maybe you've got a neighbor who's doing this and you won't bother to test them if it's already been tested. If the monarch is infected, you may see something like this. Now, this is a picture that my husband and I took ourselves. The big ovals are the scales that were lifted from the monarch's abdomen. The little circles are the spores. This monarch was badly infected with OE. Looked normal, it looked healthy, but it was infected with OE. At this point, we put this butterfly in a Ziploc bag and we stick it in the freezer and euthanize it because we figure there's no use letting it go to spread the OE around. And when you're doing this testing, you do need to remember that OE spores are difficult to destroy. So the University of Georgia suggests using gloves and then cleaning everything with 20% concentrated bleach, 80% water solution. And we do this, especially during the migration season when you're supposed to be getting healthy, clean butterflies migrating through. I'll make up a solution and I'll wipe down the doorknobs, I'll wipe down the tables I'm using, I'll wipe down the pins. We even soak our net once a month. It's just something to be aware of, because what you don't want to do is help spread OE while you're trying to figure out what's going on. This is the data that we collected from our backyard starting in January of 2022. That's when we ask ourselves this question, what's going on? What are people talking about? We don't understand. In January of 2022, it was a nice, warm, gorgeous month. We had lots of butterflies. I will say at this time we had no milkweed, but we had lots of nectar sources. We caught 20 gorgeous looking butterflies. Every single one of them was infected. Every one. That was really depressing. February, it was cold and rainy. We didn't catch any. March, we started catching more butterflies that were negative than were positive, and we were really encouraged until April and May. And you can see that we have overall about a 76% infection rate of the butterflies in our backyard. Now, January of 2023, if you remember this year in December, there was a little freeze. So January of 2023, we didn't catch any butterflies. And we were excited. We thought, good, all the resident positive monarchs have died, so we don't have to worry about them. And then in February, look what happened. Again, we started seeing the infection rate. March was another good month. We caught more of the negative infected, but again, April and May, we caught more of the ones that had the OE. Now, it's interesting to note between the 2 years, 2022 and 2023, we've got similar things happening, but we just caught more butterflies in 2022. And that really means nothing. It just means for whatever reason, we had less butterflies flying through our yard in 2023 than we did in 2022. Maybe the winds were different. Maybe we were out of town. I don't know. But the trend was the same. So we started asking ourselves, what's going on? And is there more OE now than there was? When I first started gardening, I don't remember hearing anything about OE. So I found this paper that Andy Davis of the University of Georgia put together. Now, he didn't test all these butterflies. I think insect people are really weird people. They have all these insects that they've caught. They leave them in their freezers. They leave the data sitting around. So he went back and he dug through all the data. And it looks like what he found is that there are indeed more infected butterflies in recent years than there were 20 or 30 years ago. Now, it's important to notice or to mention that all the samples that he used were examined by scientists. So like all these samples that Greg and I took, we send them to the University of Georgia, and then they do the OE counting. The data you saw was my data. University of Georgia also does some of the data counting. And what they get was really similar to what we got. As a matter of fact, our data may have underreported the negative butterflies. They found a few more positive butterflies. They found a few more butterflies that had OE that we probably should have euthanized that we didn't. But in general, we did pretty good compared to what they did. So now I'm looking at this data that Andy Davis published and wondering what's going on. Why would there be a jump? And I looked up some dates, or he looked up some dates actually. And in 1975, the Mexican colonies were discovered. Until then, people didn't know where monarch butterflies went. In 1992, the WWF started estimating the size of colonies. Now that's really neither here nor there, except it tells you they're beginning to think maybe we need to pay attention. This is important. And then in 1999, tropical milkweed was made available to the public in box stores and nurseries. Tropical milkweed, the Ophryocystis, the thing we probably all grew up with for our monarch butterflies. And in 1999, the home rearing fad started. Remember the phrase, save the monarchs? So now the question is, why would tropical milkweed cause the OE rate to go up? What's going on? Well, I think one thing we need to remember, OE can be on any milkweed. It can be on native or it can be on non-native milkweeds. And I'm going to start talking about natives and non-natives here. And when I talk about non-natives, the Ophryocystis has had the most research done on it, but there's some other ones, like Calotropis and Agamphocarpus. the Monarch shoes, and those are probably just as bad as the Ophryocystis curassatica. They're all non-natives. Okay, OE can be on any milkweed, but native milkweeds have periods of senescence and dormancy, which helps to eliminate the OE spores. What I mean by that is in the summer, after my native milkweed has made seeds, it looks like it's dying. It looks awful. It's not fun to look at, but this is what's supposed to happen to natives. All the OE drops to the ground. It's no longer a problem. In the fall, most native milkweeds go dormant. They look like they're dead. They're not. They're still growing underground, but they look dead. Now, unfortunately, you don't win any awards for Yard of the Month when you have beds full of what looks like dead milkweed, but this is what needs to happen. This was done so that the OE will no longer be a problem. Well, with tropical milkweed, it doesn't go dormant. It looks gorgeous all year round. That's one of the reasons why we loved it. It looks gorgeous in July. It looks gorgeous in October. It looks gorgeous in January, even though you do not need milkweed those times of the year. And any milkweed that puts on a growth spurt or grows in the fall is suspect. You really don't want it around. So if you have tropical or even the giants, it needs to be cut back at least from October through February. And a lot of Houston experts are saying, well, you know what? We don't need milkweed in June, July, and August. Let's start cutting it back in June. And you know, if you cut tropical milkweed back in June, 2 weeks later, you're going to have to cut it back again. And 2 weeks later, you're going to have to cut it back again because it grows. I mean, it's a weed. We love it for that reason. So if you have tropical and you can't stand to pull it out, which is what you probably really should do, then you have to keep it cut back and you have to keep working at it. Another thing that should probably not be done is to rear monarchs to help save them. I think it's interesting to note that California cracked down on home rearing. They said it's against the law. I don't know how you think you'd enforce that, but they said it's against the law. The year after they did that, there were actually more monarchs than the year before. Now, I'm not sure that that really proves anything. I don't know that there were really any more monarchs than the year before, but it does show that maybe it's not hurting them by not raising. So you do not want to rear monarchs to save them. If you want to rear them to show the kids, which I agree, it's a fun thing to do, only do it during the spring migration. So if you're in Houston, only rear monarchs from mid-March through the end of May. After that point, they're probably infected and they really should be left outside to be prey for something, wasp or caterpillars to eat. I know we don't like to think of our monarch caterpillars as being food for something else, but frankly, most caterpillars are put here to be food for something else. Very few caterpillars make it to the butterfly stage. So you can't save them all and you shouldn't save them all. If you're going to raise caterpillars, we suggest you do it, only bring a couple in at a time and raise them singly, separately from each other. Now, why would you do that? Because an infected caterpillar can't infect a non-infected caterpillar since the OE at that point is inside the caterpillar. Well, the reason I say that is because if you have an infected caterpillar, once it decides to pupate, it's going to crawl to the top of the cage. When it ecloses, there's going to be a little bit of liquid that comes out onto the milkweed. And now you've infected the milkweed that you're feeding your other caterpillars. So in general, you shouldn't rear monarchs. If you do, only during the spring migration and in very small groups. And if you're going to rear them, you really need to test them before you release them. If you can't test them, then maybe you shouldn't be rearing them. And make sure you bleach everything, all your containers and surfaces, if you're going to rear them. And then the last thing is you really don't need to be buying monarchs for release on special occasions. I'm not sure those monarchs are ever tested. I don't think the people that sell them care. So don't buy monarchs to release, although I suppose it's a fun thing to watch. It isn't a healthy thing for a monarch population. And these are the resources I've used. I use Joy's of Butterfly Gardening, Southeast Texas, heavily. The administrator is Nancy Denmark, very knowledgeable. She's got a little blurb on her website on how to test for OE if you want to go back and look for that. The other Facebook group that I use really heavily still is the Thoughtful Monarch, and that's administered by Andy Davis of the University of Georgia. He presents papers, shows data, talks about what's going on, and it's not just feelings, it's data. He's trying to show you what's going on. I use that a lot. Then, of course, the monarchparasites.org run by Sonia Altazer. And by the way, Andy Davis and Sonia Altazer are married too. They both work at University of Georgia. I've used their website quite a bit.
There's a question that there is some aquatic milkweed in heavy bloom right now. Should it be cut back?
What I have read and what I've grown to understand is that native milkweeds, including aquatic, and I know it can be growing now, evolved at the same time butterflies did. And it does not have the same chemical composition as tropical. So it should be okay. That being said, we cut ours down, but they'd already set their seeds and we collected it. So we didn't need it anymore. So that's kind of up to you. You know, some people do, some people don't. And I don't think I'd worry about it too much just since it's a native and presumably things have learned the workaround to that.
Well, I'd like to stick with mine until my pods are, producing the seed. The seed pods are ready. And then I can cut it back. But I sure would like to hang on.
Yeah, no, I would do that too. Ours just had already set seeds and we had more than we could use, so we cut it back. But
Beverly, I have a suggestion for you. I'll show you something when I start talking. I don't know if you can see it. Where
are you? You're gone.
I'm gone. I can't get it to show up on the camera.
Let me move over.
Well, it's an organza bag.
Okay.
And you put the bag over your plant, and that'll keep a monarch from laying eggs on it. You can find them on, I just can't get it to show up. I wish we had a better camera, but this is big enough to where it goes over even a gallon pot. And then if you put a stick in the soil that's in your pot, and then it goes up over the milkweed plant itself. And that'll prevent any eggs from being laid. And then you can also collect your seeds.
Good idea. Thank you. Another question. My creator and I would like to raise butterflies and their plants in Texas and Antigua and Barbuda in the Caribbean.
Yes, since I'm familiar with the Eastern migratory population, I'm not sure what's going on in all those areas. So I wouldn't be the person that could answer something like that. And in general, I think they just say rearing should be off the plate, especially for monarchs.
The data, the academic data in peer-reviewed journals says that there are so many problems associated with rearing that it just should not be done.
One last question. What are some true Houston milkweed?
I'm going to get to that in part 2.
Yeah.
Okay. We will hang on. We'll hang on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Frankly, anyone can grow milkweed from seeds. When I first started doing this, there was kind of the idea out there that it's really difficult to grow milkweed from seeds. And once you know the few steps that you have to go through, it's really not a problem. It's actually quite easy, and anyone can do it. So take you through the steps. There's approximately 37 milkweed plants that are native to Texas, and I say approximately 37 because all of the experts don't agree on what's a native and what's not. So I would say approximately 37. And for Houston, the experts on average say that there's 6, and it's the aquatic, green, slim, whorled, zyzotes, and butterfly weed. And I actually prefer to use the scientific names, perennis, viridis, linearis, verticillata. Except for zyzotes, I say zyzotes because that name is beyond my ability to pronounce. And then tuberosa. The problem with the common names is they get confused and misused. And so a lot of times people will think they are getting swamp milkweed, but it's really aquatic, or they'll think they're getting antelope milkweed and they're getting green milkweed. So stick with the scientific names if you can, and then you won't be misled, because a lot of times they're using these common names to sell tropical milkweed under other names, because the name tropical is being associated with not being desirable. So they're trying to market it under different names now. Aquatic, or Asclepias perennis, is one of the easiest to grow. If you're new at it, I would suggest this is the one that you should go for. It likes sun to partial shade. It likes moist soil, because the name implies that it's aquatic. It grows close to streams. It's interesting the seed pods don't have silk, because these grow next to streams. The seeds fall into the stream and are distributed by the flowing water. They grow to be about 2 feet tall. And like I said, they're easy to grow, and they don't require CMS. I'll get to CMS later on in the talk. Just try to remember that perennis does not need CMS. Green milkweed, or Asclepias viridis, likes full sun, likes well-drained soil. It's drought tolerant once it's established. It's 1 to 3 feet tall, and CMS is required. Slim milkweed, or linearis, likes the sun, well-drained soil, gets to be 1 to 3 feet tall. It germinates quickly, and CMS is required. Whorled milkweed, full sun, well-drained soil. It's drought resistant, 1 to 3 feet tall, and CMS is required. Zyzotes, sun, well-drained soil, drought resistant, 1 to 2 feet tall, and CMS is required. And butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa. This is the one that's being confused with tropical milkweed at nurseries. It needs sun, well-drained soil, 1 to 2 feet tall, hairy stems. CMS is required. And something interesting, and this isn't necessarily the most preferred milkweed on the part of monarchs, because it doesn't have a milky sap, because it's low in the cardinaloids, which create the milkiness in the sap. And it's what makes the caterpillar and the butterfly toxic, so that birds and other predators don't eat them quite as much. And like I said, a cautionary note, some nurseries are selling tropical milkweed using the common name butterfly weed, so make sure you know what you're purchasing. Propagating native milkweed, some disclaimers. This is a method that I've developed and I've used with good, consistent results. I started developing this after my first attempt at growing milkweed, and it was a total disaster. I essentially had 0 yield. And since I started using this and gotten to the point where it's pretty reproducible, I'm growing hundreds of plants per year that I share with the Native Plant Society and other groups to get the plants out into the consumer's hands. Other members of the milkweed community use other methods which are equally good. They give equally good results. So find one that works for you, but this can be a starting point for you. Like it was said during the introduction, I'm a chemist by training. And so I like to experiment. And that's why my method is constantly evolving. It's kind of, I go out there and it's my laboratory. But a key word for propagating native milkweed is you have to be patient. It definitely requires patience. I'm trying to show you a little container. This is a small Jello shot container that I use for one step of the process. Then I have an 8-ounce plastic cup that I drill 2 holes in the bottom of. Or you can have a 24-ounce cup that you also need to drill 2 holes in the bottom of. And then I have 2 different sizes of the organza bags. One is for putting over your plant as it grows to keep monarchs from laying eggs on it so that it has time to grow. And the second one is a smaller bag that you put over your seed pods so that you don't have to watch them constantly. If you have the bag over the seed pod, if it opens up while you're gone, like we were out of town, and I still collected all the seeds because they were in the bag when we got home. But to start the process, moisten some vermiculite. You want it moist. You don't want it sopping wet. Otherwise, all you'll end up with is moldy seeds at the end of the process. So I fill one of the 8-ounce plastic cups that I have that I've drilled the holes in. I fill it with vermiculite, and then I pour 3 8-ounce cups of water through the vermiculite and let it drain. Once it finishes draining, then that vermiculite has the right amount of water to carry out this process that we're talking about now. And it's best if you use rainwater or distilled water, because I don't have data I can share with you, but anecdotally, I get much better results if I use the rainwater. And I think it's the chlorine that interferes with germination. And eons ago, when I was a kid, if you left tap water sitting out for a while, the chlorine would dissipate. But we're using different chemicals now for chlorination. We're using chloramine, and it never dissipates. So even if you let it sit out for weeks, it still will have chlorine in it. So either distilled water or rainwater. And then after you pour the water through, let it drain for about 2 hours. And then I take a tablespoon or so of the moist vermiculite and add it to the small Jell-O shot container. Or you can use a Ziploc bag if you prefer, and then add your seeds. And you can do any level of seeds you want. You can do 5 or 10 for your use, but since I'm doing larger scale production, I'll put 25 to 50 seeds in one container to do the stratification that we're talking about here now. Then you cover with the lid or close the Ziploc. After I put the seeds in, I shake the container, and then you cold moist stratify. That's the CMS. And translating it, that means put the container in the fridge for 30 to 60 days. I usually let it go 60 days. If you go longer than 60 days, it's not really a problem. But if you go less than 30, you may not have the germination yield you're looking for. And remember, perennis does not need CMS. When you want to germinate perennis, all you need to do is soak it in, again, rainwater or distilled water overnight, and then you put it into the container with the moist vermiculite and let the germination take place. After the 30 to 60 days, you take the container out of your fridge and put the container down in a warm spot. Leave the lid on and wait for sprouts. And depending upon the type of milkweed you're trying to grow, germination can take anything from a few days to weeks. It just depends. And again, here you go. You have to have patience. And this is where you may need to take one of your containers and really make a Jell-O shot and use it to give yourself some patience. As you can see, the photo on the far right, that's where the seeds have germinated. And that's when I go to the next step. They're ready to move to the next level of growing. That's where you prepare plastic cups. The 8-ounce typically is what I use for perennis. I use a 24-ounce cup for the other milkweeds that have tap roots. The perennis has more fibrous roots that don't go down as far. And a 24-ounce cup has the same room for a taproot as a gallon pot, but it uses a lot less soil when you're starting these plants out. So you prepare the plastic cups by drilling. Again, make sure you have the holes drilled in the bottom, and then fill it with a potting soil. And specifically, you don't a moist potting soil, and you don't want something that has fertilizer, because milkweeds do not need fertilizer. They do better in poor soil, actually. Otherwise, they tend to get very leggy. So I tend to look for some of the cheapest potting soil I can find, and that's what I use. So after you have your cup filled with the potting soil, I use a pencil or some other object to make a hole in the center of the cup going all the way down to the bottom. And then I add a small amount of mycorrhiza to the hole that I made in the cup down the center of the cup. And the mycorrhiza is a fungus that associates with the roots of the milkweed. And it's a symbiotic relationship. The mycorrhiza helps transport nutrients into the milkweed, and then the fungus gets the sugars and things from the milkweed plant. So they work together. Once you've done that, gently remove the seedling from the germination container and be very careful because the roots break very easily. And then place a seedling in each of your cups and then gently work the roots down into the hole that you made, and then press the soil up around the seedling so that there's no air around the roots. And be sure and label each cup. And even then, that doesn't necessarily always work because I've had cups outside that are labeled and I've had crows come up and pull the labels out of the cups. So it's kind of an interesting game they like to play, I guess. And then put each cup into a tray and add water to the bottom of the tray so that you bottom water the milkweed. And this encourages root development. And I tend to use a different tray for different varieties of milkweeds so that you can add the water to the tray according to the needs of that milkweed, because the aquatic needs constant moisture, whereas some of the others do better if they can dry out a little bit in between the watering. So otherwise you get root rot and things of that sort. After several weeks, you can decide where you want to put your milkweed. And I test it out by putting the whole cup into the prepared hole and backfill around the cup. Make the hole that you put the cup into just deep enough to where it's at the lip of the cup. And that way you can see if your plant's happy there. If not, then it's easy to move. And be sure and water frequently because the seedlings, while they're getting established, need to stay moist for the most part. And seedlings can actually overwinter in the cups, especially the 24-ounce cups. And that way you'll remember where you've planted your milkweeds, because if they senesce or go dormant and all you have is a small stick in your garden, you may not remember that that's one of your milkweed plants. So the cup will help you out there. When you go to put the milkweed into the ground, actually add another dose of the mycorrhiza to the soil, and then add your plant with the surrounding soil, and then backfill and water it in place. And again, mark where you plant your milkweed, because during the winter months, there will be nothing left above ground and you'll forget about it and end up digging it up. And again, it can go dormant or senesce during summer months also. So be patient. Don't assume it's dead. Just it's mostly dead. And you'll find after the weather cools off a bit or you have some rain, you'll see little green sprouts coming out on it. Cautionary notes, the milky sap of milkweeds contains a mix of cardinaloids and glycosides. And so use caution when working with those, because they can, if you get it in your eyes, it can cause issues for your eyes. And if you're very sensitive, it can cause heart issues. So if I'm going to be doing a lot of pruning and working with milkweeds, I use disposable gloves. And if you're buying milkweed plants, be careful where you buy them. First, make sure you know what you're getting and you're not getting tropical by mistake. And then growers often use systemic pesticides, which can remain in the plant for up to 3 months. And a caterpillar eating these treated plants will die. So my rule of thumb is I won't buy any milkweed unless it has aphids on it, because if the aphids are there, then it hasn't been treated. And the only other thing is if you absolutely trust your supplier, then I guess you can buy it, but just be careful. Resources, again, Joys of Butterfly Gardening, Southeast Texas. It's a group that has detailed instructions on growing milkweed. That's where actually I first started learning about this. Nancy Denmark taught me everything I know about this. I've just kind of mutated her process a bit. They conduct a grow out group each year. They guide you through the entire process, and that you can actually obtain seeds from them if you contact the group. And also another Facebook group is the Monarchs and Milkweed group. And with that, if there's any questions about milkweed or OE.
Yes, there are questions. One of the first ones I have is you never gave a amount of mycorrhizae. You said a bit, a dash, or what how much mycorrhizae are you really talking about?
I'm afraid I garden the way I cook, where it's kind of it's a very small amount. It's just a light dusting of the interior of the hole, like less than an eighth of a teaspoon, even less than that. I have a container with a lid, and I literally just sprinkle a little bit of mycorrhizae in. Sorry, I can't be more precise than that. I guess
That's okay. I don't know if you're using a teaspoon, a quarter teaspoon.
No, it's a very small amount.
Okay. All right. Can you talk about the mislabeled milkweed at big nurseries and hardware stores? What can I do to prevent from falling into the trap?
Tuberosa will have hairy stems. You'll have to look for very small, basically hairs on the stem of the plant. And also, tropical has kind of segments at each leaf node, if you can check for that. But the vast majority of the plants you're going to find at any of them, it's going to be tropical, just because tuberosa and others are challenging for their growers and they just can't get them yet.
So then this kind of leads into it too. Somebody today was shopping and found tropical milkweed marked Milkweed Asclepius, but not marked tropical or any other kind. So
because their marketing group knows that they don't want to use the word tropical or Mexican, because they are becoming less popular. So they use Asclepius, which is just the overall general name. You have to look for Asclepius tuberosa, and even then, that has been on tropical in some of the box stores and at some of our local nurseries, unfortunately.
Virginia asked, I didn't know that chloramines never broke down. That explains a lot for her. She said, I'm using filters now on my hoses. Do you think that helps?
Filters won't take it out.
Okay.
You're just going to have to buy a gallon of distilled or get a rain barrel like we have.
Where do you get mycorrhizae?
If I can't buy it on Amazon, I don't buy it. I don't go shopping. So all of the stuff I talk about is available on Amazon, or you can get some of the local nurseries have mycorrhizae.
The aphids, are they harmful to the milkweed plant?
We don't do anything about aphids. In fact, we leave them, and then you'll be amazed at how many ladybugs will show up. You'll have the world supply of ladybugs find your yard, and that corrects the problem.
Okay, that sounds good. Who is a reliable native milkweed seller around here?
Native Plant Society, Master Gardener, Buchanan's has some in this area. Friendswood Hardware will next spring, they'll have some, but right now it's a little bit limited in this area.
Okay. Can you buy straight mycorrhizae or only in premix and other soil mixes?
I buy a small bag. It's pure mycorrhiza. They have it in granulated form or powder form. I prefer powder because it's easier to get into the hole that I make for the seedling to go into.
Okay, and is it better to plant in the ground or leave the cups in for the winter senescence? If left in cups, do you need to water over the winter?
Either way, you'll need to water it. If it's growing, chances are if it's dormant, then it doesn't need water. You just leave it alone until it starts sprouting in the spring. I tend to let things overwinter because it protects the roots a little bit, and then also I can move it if I want to the following spring.
Okay.
And all of the ones I talked about work well here because we have all of them growing in our garden, and they come back each year.
Okay. Should we kill milkweed bugs or milkweed beetles?
The beetle is the one I get rid of because it'll eat it down to the ground. The bug I don't bother with.
This person is from the Dallas-Fort Worth area and says, my property has an abundance of viridis. Should I mow the dried plants after gathering the seeds?
No, I wouldn't, because the reason we aren't saying it's essential to cut down the natives is that there's actually a compound in tropical that academic research is starting to show that causes the migrating monarchs to drop out of diapods. And so it's only the tropical that does that, apparently. The native milkweeds have been here all along and haven't caused the migrators to drop out. They don't have that compound. So even if the milkweed is still present in your property, it shouldn't be an issue for the migrating monarchs. The only thing it'll be a problem for is if you have the resident population, and then you may want to do something after the migration has gone through.
This is a question. Do you think I should just pull out the tropical milkweed?
Yeah, I'm pretty hardcore. Yes.
Okay. I agree. And someone shared that Dr. Earth is sold at Lowe's and Home Depot, just so you know. When cutting back the tropical milkweed, do I need to just cut back the flowers or down to the ground?
Down to the ground.
Okay, sounds good.
The flowers have nothing to do with any of this. It's the leaves that cause the issue. That's where the OE spores are. So, well, they can be on the flower too.
Okay, here's a pretty serious question. Due to the high OE rates in and around Houston, should we even plant or keep milkweed, even if it's native? Whoa.
Places like Florida that has like an 80 or 90% OE rate, they've actually had people say we should probably just not even have milkweed at all, period. And at this point, I would say, if you don't want to mess with it, just have nectar flowers, have other larval foods. You don't have to have milkweed. There's plenty of milkweed around, despite what popular papers and things want to say. There doesn't seem to be a shortage of milkweed. So if you don't want to have it, if you think it's causing a problem, and if you're testing in your yard, you'll know if you have a problem or not, then yeah, I'm on the fence about that. I've actually thought about that, but after we invested so much energy in figuring out how to grow it, you don't want to pull it all out.
I would say I'm not on the fence. I would keep the natives around to help support the migration in the spring. Yeah. And we do other things to help mitigate the OE. Like we test everything that comes into our yard. That we can catch. Yeah, my 70-year-old knees don't like jumping around chasing monarch, but I do entertain the neighbors.
Okay.
The question just came up that I saw, are monarchs endangered? And the answer to that is no. The government body that issues endangered rulings just ruled that monarchs are not endangered. They were talking about doing it, and then the ruling was challenged, and they came out with that it's not. Actually, the number of monarchs in North America is actually increasing. It's the migration that may be endangered, and even that is questionable because they really don't know how to count the number of monarchs when they get down to Mexico. It varies so much. It's kind of like they're flying over areas, guesstimating how many trees have monarchs, and then guesstimate how many monarchs are on each tree. And that's how they come up with this number. So monarchs in general are not endangered. Question mark still about the migration.
Greg and Linda, thank you so much.